Chapter 2, Slippers. Over time, Grandpa's mind began transporting him back to the glory days, more and more. By the time our story begins, the old man completely believed he was still in World War II, even though the war had ended decades before. Grandpa had become very confused, a condition that affects some elderly people. It's serious and sadly there's no cure. Instead, it seemed likely that it would worsen over time, until one day Grandpa might not even remember his own name. But as in life, whenever there is tragedy, you'll sometimes find comedy. In recent times, the old man's confusion had led to some really funny moments. On bonfire night, Grandpa insisted that everyone go down to the air raid shelter at once, as the next door neighbour had lit off fireworks in their back garden. Or the time when Grandpa cut wafer-thin chocolate mints into 4 pieces with his penknife and shared it out to the family, saying that it was because of rationing. There's a wee picture of him doing that. I think that might be after 8s. Oh, I love an after 8. Right. Most memorable of all was a time when Grandpa decided that a shopping trolley at the supermarket was really a Lancaster bomber. He hurtled down the aisles in a top secret mission, hurling huge bags of flour. These bombs exploded everywhere, over the food, over the tills, even covering the haughty supermarket manager from toe to toe. There he is in his trolley. Was that fun? She looked like a powdery ghost. The clean-up operation lasted for weeks. Grandpa was banned from the supermarket for life. Sometimes Grandpa's confusion could be more upsetting though. Jack had never met his grandmother before. That is because she died nearly 40 years ago. It was one night towards the end of the war in a Nazi bombing raid over London. At the time, Jack's father was just a newborn baby. However, when Jack stayed at his grandfather's tiny flat, the old man would sometimes call out for Peggy darling, as if she was still in the next room. Tears would well up in the boy's eyes. It was heartbreaking. Despite everything, Grandpa was an incredibly proud man, for everything had to be just so. Now this reminds me of maybe Captain Tom, doesn't it? I don't know whether you think so. He was always impeccably dressed in a uniform, double-breasted blazer, crisp white shirt and neatly pressed grey slacks. A maroon, silver and blue striped Royal Air Force tie was forever knotted neatly around his neck. As was the fashion with many World War II pilots, he favoured a dashing Flying Aces moustache. It was a thing of wonder. The moustache was so long it connected right to his sideburns. Grandpa would twizzle the ends of the moustache for hours until it stuck out at a right angle. The one thing that would give Grandpa's confused state of mind away was his choice of footwear, slippers. The old man no longer wore shoes. Now, he always forgot to put them on. Whenever the weather was like rain or sleet or snow, he would still be sporting the brown check slippers. Of course, Grandpa's eccentric behaviour made the grown-ups worry. Sometimes Jack would pretend to go to bed, but instead creep out of his bedroom and sit at the top of the stairs in his pyjamas. There he would listen to his father and mother downstairs in the kitchen discussing Grandpa. They would use big words that Jack didn't understand, so to describe the old man's condition. The mum and dad would argue about Grandpa being put into an old folks' home. The boy hated hearing this about his grandfather because he talked about it as if he was some sort of problem. However, being only 12 years old, Jack felt powerless to do anything. But none of this stopped Jack adoring hearing stories about the old man's wartime adventures, even though the tales had become more real, so Grandpa would now have the pair of them act them out. They were like boys' own adventures, so stories of daring do. Grandpa had an ancient wooden record player the size of a bath. On it he would play booming orchestral music with a volume as high as it would go. Military music was his favourite, and together Jack and his grandfather would listen to huge classical pieces like Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory, or the Pomp and Circumstance marches, way into the night. 2 old armchairs would become their pulpits, And as the music soared, so did their imaginary fighter planes. A Spitfire for Grandpa and a Hurricane for Jack. Up, up and away they would go into the clouds. Together would fly high above the clouds, outwitting enemy aircraft. Every Sunday night, the pair of flying aces would win the Battle of Britain, without even leaving the old man's tiny flat. Together, Jack and his grandpa inhabited their own world and had countless imaginary adventures. However, the night our story starts, a real life adventure was about to begin.